Sure. We have been in the Bavas for over a year, but we are going to conclude next month and move on to Sanhedrin. We are almost there. So folks have been real troopers about this material. As you know, we always have different guests who come and teach this class for us. And this morning we are joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. All right, Rabbi Goldberg, I think
Hi,
we are
everybody.
in. Go ahead and get it
All right.
started.
Good morning. Or good morning for me. Good, whatever. I see someone just said hello from the Czech Republic, so it's already past
Yep.
morning there. Good,
From
whatever time of day
Jerusalem.
it is to you. I was thinking, Rachel, in general lately, as you know, we started our cycle at the beginning of January, I feel like 5 years ago. Like we're almost 5 years
Yes.
into the Daf Yomi cycle, and I had this moment of like, oh my God, it's seven, there's still 2.5 years to go. But finishing 5 of 7.5 years feels like, oh my God, we're almost done. And I have,
2/3.
yeah, 2/3 of the way there. And there's a lot of good stuff at the end still coming. And then it
We,
starts over. You could do it all again. Anyways,
we started with a promise to readers we would do tractate brachot. And we weren't sure if we would last past that.
look
So
at that. Well, thanks to everyone for being here to keep this going. The My Jewish Learning Daf Yomi space has been awesome. Lots of great learning. Anyways, um, I have two sets of texts I want to talk about today. The first one is the primary one, and time permitting, I have a second case that to talk about if we get there. I'm always conscious of not rushing through it and giving people time to ask questions. Totally separate topics though. So we'll do the first one. We'll open up for questions. We'll see how that goes. And if there's time, I got a second one. Um, the we've been talking about a lot about the laws of inheritance, and some of what I was thinking this week as I was preparing for today and reviewing again the week of Daf Yomi that we had. Um, that some of my feeling of we've been reading all these laws of inheritance feels like there are all these theoretical cases that have to do with just the rabbis and their imagination and what if this happens and what if that happens. And as I was thinking about today and the case I picked, I realized that these are actual cases and actual things that people could be worried about that could come up even in their own way in our day. So the first thing we're going to look at today is about inheritance, and it's sort of about fairness within the family. And to connect it to modern times, I'll start with uh, a particular, I guess this is reality. It's not a reality Zoom. So a window into reality from the Goldberg family, although like reality TV is a little dramatized and edited to make that, this will be too. As we have two kids in college, twins, as a matter of fact, and because they're twins, like most of their life, like they did the same things. So we had a thing where two kids had like equal benefits from their being members of our family because they went to the same school and the same summer programs, and they like you could look at like equity between children because they traveled the same path at the same time. There was a lot of equity to it. And college is the first time they're in college now. College is the first time where they ended up in different places. And in a program they're both in two wonderful schools, but that has a different tuition point. And as it happens, um, one of my daughters, like college will be probably her last. She's studying at a theater program to be a stage manager. College is going to be her last degree. She's going to go off into the working world afterwards. My other daughter is thinking about graduate school and a master's degree program. And it happens that the one thinking about more school is at the college with the lower tuition. So she started thinking about graduate school, said, well, my college cost less money than my sister's college. Does that mean the balance of whatever, wasn't paid on tuition that was paid for my sister could be applied to graduate school tuition? Um, that made me, I thought about that as was reading this week's Gemara, in that it's an interesting case of sort of how you frame this. So one question is sort of, did we as a family commit to supporting our kids through, to provide them with a college education? Or did we commit to providing them X number of dollars for tuition for any education, at this adult stage in their life? Meaning, the daughter making this request was saying, well, you spent X on my sister, you should spend X on me too. And the counter argument to that is we promised everybody, support through college without, knowing that one college education was what we promised, not necessarily connected to the price. And it's an interesting, and there's these things are complicated and all this education is expensive. So there's no right things there. Or I like that someone just put in the chat, when does Bank of Dad and Mom close out? That's a great question. In my own family, with my parents, we have the Bank of Dad where Dad is the CEO, but Mom is the president of the board. So they each have different, you have to choose who you ask depending on what you're doing. Anyways, I love that comment in the text there, Robert. Anyways, so then to extend this one more, and then we'll go to the text in a second. So I have a younger daughter who's still in high school who has yet to start the college search and going to college process. And given that we're thinking about inheritance law in the Talmud, there's a morbid thought about this. Like, should there be a horrific event and my wife and I not be alive when our younger daughter starts college? There's the question, well, if she's entitled to college too, does her college, funding for college come out before the estate is divided up before the three kids or after? Meaning, since her sister's got a college benefit, while in this theoretical example, we're here and alive, if we were to no longer be alive when she starts college, does the estate first separate out her college money to pay for college to even it out with her sisters? And then it's divided in three, or is it divided into three and then the younger daughter uses her part of the tuition to pay for college? So those can be, I imagine, real scenarios and real thoughts about, what's fair, what's equitable, how it sets up. I imagine, I'm not an expert at this, that, our estate documents, our wills sort of determine how this is going to be. And there are laws in America that determine when the money's divided up when, depending what's on the wills. And it makes us think about anyways, that, our estate planning was done when all of our kids, we're very close to diapers as opposed to finishing high school and in college. So we might need to update that as things change. But now I want to look back to the Gemara and say that, the case I want to look at is, it brings up not college, but another major life event. And some of the issues here are similar to what I just said. And I hope this contemporary example helps us ease into the rabbinic text that's here. Oh, and Betsy says, yes, update your wills. We do have a plan to do that, Betsy. So thank you, but it's coming. It's time. It's time in our life to do that. All right. I just added the source sheet in the chat. I'm going to put it on the screen right now. So you don't have to click over to it. Oh my God, I always love how fast you guys are. I shared the text and I already see 8 people in it. I'm going to start my slideshow. And so here's the parallel text to the example. Well, I don't know this parallel, but my example from this modern world example, in some ways is parallel to what we read this week in the Talmud. So the Mishnah on 139a says, if a person died and left adult and minor sons, the adults are not provided for by using the funds of the minors, and the minors are not sustained, right? It's a different word in Hebrew, sustained as opposed to provided for, and the sustained word implies like receiving food, right? Fed by using the funds of the adults. Rather, they receive a share of the inheritance equally. I'm going to set aside, I didn't gender neutralize the text here. We've had other discussions in the Gemara about inheritance with daughters and the difference between daughters and sons. I left this in the original Gemara non-egalitarian language here, left sons instead of children. But so here we have a situation where someone dies and their estate gets passed to their children, and their children are different ages. It says adult and minor sons, gedolim uktanim, big and small is the actual name in the words in the Mishnah, and small, ktanim, small, Their kids are often, katan is also the word for minor, so gedolim could be major. They also, you'll see, could be older. It might be pre or post the age of majority, right? Bar and bat mitzvah. It might be just different stages of life and need for care. But this says the older children are not provided by the funds that's supposed to be there for the younger children, and the younger are not sustained by the funds that are there for the older children. And the commentators kind of say, well, kids of different ages have different requirements. Right? The older you are, the more you eat, the more expensive your food budget might be. The minor children who are really minor, smaller, need certain daycare where older children might not. But if the older children are adults and taking over the work on the estate, right, they're working, the younger children might need tutors and childcare and all those things, and the needs are different. And what the Mishnah says is that you don't support the needs of the different needs of these children at different stages in their development by the communal inheritance. What you do is you divide up the estate equally between each of them, and each person's funds support their own needs. So the answer to the theoretical question I asked before is right. This would say when someone, when the parent dies and the estate is transferred, you divide it between parties. Everyone gets their share, and then your share is used to support you in the way that you need it. And here, one difference is, right, we know that the estate has a responsibility for the minor children who are not yet reached the age of majority to sustain them, has different responsibilities to the adult children. But here it says, right, you create separate funds. The minor gets the adult children get control of their funds and decide the minor's funds are someone's appointed to help be the administrator of that, but the estate takes care of them. But it's done on a case by case basis, not that some things are done out of the common pool and then divided. Some of the commentators point out that this is the case only if if the children are not sure, are arguing about how to use the funds, that meaning the children could decide to leave the funds pooled and to support people differently from them. And if the adult children want the estate to cover the expenses from the minor children and their part to do that as well, it doesn't have to be this way. But in a moment where the kids have a conflict, this is how you settle it. Everyone gets their share and their needs are paid for from that share. All right, that's Mishnah, the first half. The second half of the Mishnah, or actually there are many halves to this Mishnah, many pieces. The first half of the part we're going to look at says the following: if the adults married, the minors marry. It sounds very Dr. Seussian in its cadence. The adults marry, the minors marry, and in a good Mishnah way, it needs to be filled in a little bit, which we'll do in a second. If the adults marry, the minors marry. We're gonna explain that more. But if the minors say we are marrying in the same manner that you adults married during our father's lifetime, the court does not listen to them. Rather, whatever their father gave the adults in his lifetime, he gave them. The minors don't have the right to receive more than their share of the inheritance. We're going to come back to this second part in a second. I want to unpack that first phrase: if the adults married, the minors marry. And I'm going to do that because Rav Yehuda in the Gemara explains what this means a little more and spells out what this whole part of the Mishnah means. So Rav Yehuda says, this is what the Mishnah means. If the adults married after their father's death and used common inheritance to pay for their wedding, the minors that marry after their father's death may also pay for the wedding from the common inheritance. Meaning, so if the father dies and then the adults get married and use common funds for it, the minor siblings, upon growing up and getting married, can also use the common pooled funds, right, to pay for their wedding. Right? So if adult children, after their father had died, use the estate's money to pay for the wedding, everyone gets that benefit in the future, regardless of their age now. But if the adults married during their father's lifetime, so dad was still alive, parents were still alive, the adult children got married, the parents paid for the wedding, and then the parents die, and then the minors say after their father's death, we will marry in the same marriage that you married. The court doesn't listen to them. This is what Rav Yehuda explained. So the adult children get married, parents pay for it, parents die. The minor children said, well, you got a wedding from the family estate and the common funds, so we should get that too. So the money for our wedding should get set aside and we should have the same kind of wedding that you got to do when we got to have married. When we get married, when you got married, you got this wedding. We're going to get the same wedding from the parents' estate. But the Mishnah says, nope, that's not how it works. The court doesn't listen to them if they press for that when they're dividing up the estate. Rather, whatever the parents gave to their children, to the adult children while they're alive for their weddings, the minor children do not have the right for equal treatment from the same son after the inheritance. In some ways, that's sort of with the college example, right? Some kids go to college and parents pay for it. The parents die. The next children say, well, our college money should be separated from the estate before it's divided up. Our Mishnah says, no, it doesn't work that way. Certain things happen during your lifetime, and once parents die at that moment, right there, we don't think about equal benefits for being children of the family. While parents are alive, they're in charge of how they distribute their funds. At the moment when the estate is passed down, it's divided evenly between the children, and you don't go back to account for what some kids got before the parents died and what other kids did not get, and try to even up before you divide the estate amongst the children. And so I'm going to close the text and stop sharing for a minute and come back. And so what I want to circle back to the example I started with from Life at Home. There are times at which reading through this chapter of Baba Batra with lots of inheritance rules and lots of cases and lots of things where what crept into my mind was, okay, here's another case, here's another thing. This is the rabbis, like we see, the rabbis start with a series of law of inheritance, and they start to think, what if this happened? What if that happened? This happens, what if that happens? And they play it all out. And sometimes it feels like an intellectual exercise. And I was feeling a little bit that way in this chapter of Baba Batra. But what happened over time was I started to say, wait a minute, these are things we might have to deal with. And there are ways in which in families, while the nature of our states and how we sustain our kids during our lifetime and after has changed culturally, socially, legally, economically, all this since that time, the issues that the rabbis raise could be ones that are still alive and well for us, whether for education or marriage itself. Also, as who was it? Betsy said I should start to redo our estate now that our kids are older. I'm also, Betsy, thinking about now that our kids are in college and we're moving past that stage, we have to think about start saving, like for one day, should we have to contribute to a wedding? There's that too. And it's not, I guess I say this one more time to wrap this part up, to say it's not so far-fetched from the reality of what we might have to think about how we raise our children and treat them fairly for all the things we want to provide for them. That here the rabbis are actually raising questions that are questions for us today as well. All right, let me pause. I see some questions have come in the chat. Rachel, were you able to follow some of them to pull out some questions? Sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot for that. I was not, I guess, is that point. We can just open it up to people to raise their hand, ask a question if you have them, or we can search the chat.
All right. So couple question about what is the common inheritance?
What is the common inheritance? Got it. The estate, the common inheritance, I think, is the term that just means the estate as a whole, meaning the parents die, the whole estate gets passed to the children before it's actually divided up. It belongs to all of them, right? We've had some cases about like what happens if the enhancements are made to the property before it gets divided up. So then the value of the common estate has gone up, and the parents die. In theory, everyone owns a share, but then the value changes based on what some of the kids do, and then later you divide it up. We had that question of what do we do with the enhancement? Who gets the benefit of the enhanced work? So the common estate is the jointly held property before it's divided up between the kids.
I find it confusing sometimes reading these texts when the division happens, right? Because if you have adult children and minor children, like when I have trouble picturing that when I read these texts, when exactly is this all getting divided?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think that's always scripted. here's what I thought about that in terms when I was thinking. Like your family owns a business, and the parents' generation, who are the owners, die, and the business gets passed down to the children. So there's a stage at which the children own the business together, and they might choose, we own this business. There's a document that says we each own an equal share, but the business operates as one whole business. And then when profits are taken out, it's divided between the kids. Or you could choose, from our business, we're going to buy everyone a car, and you get $10,000 for a car, or you get one car, whatever it costs, but the business will pay for your car. Those are some of the things. And then at some point, the kids might say, all right, enough of the business. Let's sell it and divide it up. And then it gets divided up. And I imagine that the families we're talking about here in the rabbinic imagination are more in the agricultural world. It might make sense if the children are all living on the family's land and they're farmers, you might want to keep one big field and not divide up the field to make small fields, because there's an economy of scale having a big field. So the siblings they become joint owners, right? There's the issue of the birthright and the double portion, which we spent some time on the Gemara. But when is it divided up? I think, it's shared ownership, and there's a period of time before it's actually divided up into separate properties, which there's a common ownership between the siblings. I don't think, as far as I could see here, the rabbis have not legislated this much get divided at this time. It seems like it's a case by case basis. And that's the economic advantage, assuming if all the siblings get along, it's great. They can figure out it makes sense for us to keep a big field and divide it up, and divide the profits, as opposed to, nope, I don't want to be in the soybean business anymore, and I'm going to grow wheat, so I want my 1/3 of the field, and I'm going to separate out. And so that gets more complicated when there are minors who don't have the same say in decision making. How do we protect their rights, and how much of their rights come out of the pooled inheritance, and how much do not? And that's where it gets messy here. But you're right. Different cases could be talking about different times of dividing up, depending on sides.
Yeah, it turns out it was complicated then as it is now, and lots of ways to do it.
Yes. Yes.
We have a bunch more questions rolling in. So, and I'm not great always at listening and reading the chat, but I'm going to do my best here. We have a couple questions about people who are sustained versus inherit. I'm going to try and roll some things together. So, for instance, minors are sustained until they reach majority, and then potentially inherit. Daughters are sustained, not inherited, if there are sons. Some questions of logistics about that. How are the minors sustained? And is it correct? Lynn remembers somewhere perhaps reading that sons inherit, but if it's a tiny estate and there's only enough to sustain the daughters, then basically the sons are out of luck, because sustaining the daughters comes ahead of inheriting the sons, and they actually end up having to go live off charity.
Right. And mixed in there also is a widow, if she is still alive. Right. A woman has the right to be sustained by her deceased husband's estate until the time where she decides to collect what she's due from the wedding ketubah. We studied that, I don't know, in ketubah a long time ago. Daughters are sustained by the estate and children, right? The father's estate has a responsibility to take care of its people, right? Children, daughters until they're married, and wives until they claim their ketubah value. And that sustenance precedes, the obligation for sustenance precedes the inheritance, right? So a poor family, a smaller estate that has to sustain people, means the inheritors don't get anything. If there's enough to provide sustenance and things then remain, then the heirs divide up the estate if there's more than one of them. And some, minor sons are in a sort of a double category. They have to be taken care of from the estate until they're adults. But as our text today said, they get sustained, right? The daughters get sustained from the estate as a whole until they're married. The sons get sustained until they inherit their share of the estate. And if the brothers don't want to sustain a son who has a share of the estate from the from the whole inheritance before it's divided up, they can divide it up before, and the minor son's piece is held in trust, and they get they get their sustenance from their own slice of the inheritance that right, separate. This is your fund to you, and you're going to take care of yourself. The fund will take care of you till you're an adult, and then you get possession of it moving forward. Yes, complicated today as it was complicated then as it was today potentially, and probably harder in some ways because so much of our of wealth is digital. It's not an actual thing you have to divide up. It just happens. On the it's easier to divide certain kinds of property now than then.
Yes. And someone commented that it feels like the assumption here is a lot of people are farmers. Not all people in the rabbinic period were farmers. That's true. Like we know some rabbis, we have descriptions of their occupations, and they had businesses of various kinds as well. So this would refer, I think, to both like land property, but also animals, assets,
Okay. If you were a
money.
blacksmith also, right. That's an interesting question about like how much can you do like um I'm forgetting the term, like anthropology or social history, like from the Talmud. It seems like everybody's a landowner and has farms and is dividing that up. And probably like wealthy people own land. There were plenty of people who like lived on, were were workers or servants on estates that did not have this, right? They weren't, think about movies or books from, I don't know, the Roman time period. Like there was a landowner and estate and all the people who lived on the estate were sustained by the estate, but they didn't own it. The Talmud seems to be talking about one slice of society. I wish I knew more. My sense is it's not everybody, and there's a certain economic or sociological bias here where we're talking about some of the population, and others don't fit into these categories at all. And I imagine there are many scholars who have written about this, but that is not.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more. This is kind of a modern question. What if you have children with wildly different needs, right? So like, let's say you have a child who's disabled and can't, and isn't expected to grow to be able to provide for themselves in the same way maybe another child would be able to in that world. Is there an accommodation for that?
I love that question. And I would say that notes like we are far more sensitive to that today, and even compared to 20, 30, 50 years ago, like in the societies, I imagine that, we all live in those on the Zoom. I know in today's world, people in that situation might set up their estate for here's a certain amount of we're going to dedicate a certain portion of our estate to continue to sustain this child who has individual needs as opposed to other children, right? There are families who have to make those decisions, not just how they use their resources where they have children with very different needs while they're alive, but what that will mean in the long term. Yeah, and of course, today there are certain benefits, right, that the state provides to people who are disabled, right? There's certain support, the support that the community provides through taxes and, the social service programs for individuals like that. So disabled children in that way. The Talmud does recognize, and we've seen cases, although not in this chapter, I don't think, but about people who have limited mental capacity and who don't have the same decision-making rights in business. And so there are categories for the rabbis of people who, even though they have become biologically or chronologically adults, don't take on adult rights because of the way they're incapacity, they're limited in their capacity. The inheritance chapter hasn't, right? I'll say this: the example I was gonna weave in at the end, which we don't have time for, which is totally fine, was how the etrog shows up and the rituals of Hanukkah become part of the discussion of inheritance. So sometimes topics from other parts of the Talmud get woven into the discussion of inheritance. You could, the case I was going to bring was someone said, hey, this debate we're having, this could apply in a really fun way to the lulav and etrog. Let's talk about it. Whoever asked that question today is sort of saying the same thing. There are people who have different children with different needs. How would the inheritance laws take care of that? In this chapter, the rabbis don't deal with that head on because it doesn't come up. We'd have to go back and dig into the places where it outlines how that works. Sometimes for children, the rabbis have talk about an adult is appointed to be their caregiver when they become orphans, and those caregivers can sometimes be uh, um, appointed for children who will not become functioning adults, etc. So that's an incomplete answer, but also the nature of Talmud. Sometimes those questions saying, how does this whole set of laws apply to this case, happens in the Talmud, and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, I'm sure like a search on Safaria could lead to places where in the texts that have been uploaded, which become more and more every day, someone had that question for real and dealt with it. So it's a great Talmudic question and a great rabbinic legal question. And sometimes you have to dig deeper to find the answers to that when the Talmud doesn't address it head on or address it head on in the chapter that's about the particular topic. Some of that is Talmud too.
Yeah. And also we began this chapter with, or this discussion really, with a lot of material on fathers who gift things before they pass away to circumvent standard procedures of inheritance. So one could imagine that a parent who knows their child is going to need something extra might make a choice like that as well. That's sort of similar to what we would do today, where we put things in a trust or whatever.
Yes. One more. I see we're out of
That would be
minutes.
another option within that law.
Right. I see we're out of minutes, but one call out. Oh, no, I can't remember the etrog page. I think it's 139. I saw Lynn just wrote the etrog is a short-term asset,
Right.
not a long-term
Why
asset.
are we talking about the etrog so much?
Right. So just to call out, I didn't start with that text because I wrote about it this week. And if you're on the email blog, you might have seen that. If you're interested in the case of the etrog, I think it was 139. You could look back at our, you could read what I wrote. But one of the things, the case there is about like if I, say, Rachel, you're going to hear, sorry, I do that all the time when I see Rachel, Rachel, you're gonna inherit my etrog, but after you, it's gonna go and be passed on to Lynn. And so you become like a care for the etrog, not a full owner. And like one of the things I called out there was, especially before refrigeration, like if I did that with a piece of land, we might have trouble later on. If we do that with an etrog, like how long can a etrog last outside of the refrigerator? I know if you stick cloves in it, there's a way to dry it and it could last for years, but not as a functional active. That's a whole separate thing. But I saw that comment from Lynn. And anyways, you can go look for the piece on My Jewish Learning if you want to read more there. Alas, as I thought we weren't going to have time to get to it, so I'm glad I can. But
And I think I would just add, Lynn, also that the example like the etrog, which is such a peripheral example, is the kind of thing that the rabbis really like to think with. It's dafka because this is a weird one and it's testing our boundaries, that it helps us really understand how the law is supposed to operate, right? Land we understand maybe, but what happens when we think about an object whose use and the length of time which it lasts is much different, right? That sort of kind of boundary testing is a great way for the rabbis to really understand the laws better.
Especially because the etrog, what's weird about it also is like if you come to my house and say, "Can I borrow your Havdalah candle?" I can give it to you and you can make Havdalah with my candle, no problem. But the particular thing about the etrog is you're supposed to own your own etrog. So if you sit next to me in shul and you don't have a lulav and etrog, listen, I'm a nice guy. I'm going to say, here, take mine, do the mitzvah of it. But the rabbis say for you to really do the mitzvah of it, I have to give it to you as a gift. I have to say, I'm giving you my lulav and etrog. I can make it conditional on you returning it to me. I'm going to give it to you on the condition that one day you give it back. But the etrog's in this quirky ownership category because of how the rabbis do the law of etrog, which makes it interesting for its quirks and then the quirks of inheritance law. But yeah, that's probably really theoretical. And I don't think that, my daughters in college are going to make claims on like our etrog from 2 years ago, even though it was a really lovely one, the same way they might be interested on like, what sustenance they're going to get in the next stage of their life after college. But anyway. All right.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Rabbi Goldberg. Shabbat shalom to all of you. We will be back next week to do this all over again as we continue to make our way through Bava Batra. So lovely to see you all. Shabbat shalom and see you soon.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody.